Mystery MTG Damien, and let me help you become more informed about competitive Magic. Let's jump into it. Welcome to our Tournament Tables Corner, where we begin this week with Pro Tour March of the Machine, which wrapped up on Sunday with nearly 250 players doing battle in Standard Constructed and March of the Machine draft. Standard has seen innovations large and small over the last few months as the regional championship qualifiers and the large regional championship tournaments themselves played out around the world. The rock-solid core that many players are now weary of seeing on the battlefield, consisting of Blood-Tithe Harvester, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and either Corpse Appraiser or Shouldered the Apocalypse, has once again proven that it's the best foundation to build on in Standard, as we saw a staggering 65% of Pro Tour competitors run a full 4 Fable of the Mirror Breaker in their decks. RAKDOS decks made up 5 of the top 8 spots in the tournament, and 10 of the top 16 decks, led by Team Handshake, who clearly had the best version of RAKDOS for the tournament. The only other notable decks that performed well were a couple of copies of Esper Legends, a tweaked version of Mono-White Midrange, a lone Blue-White Soldiers deck, and of course, the 5-color Ramp deck, designed, unsurprisingly, to beat up on RAKDOS. While some thought the stranglehold that the Black-Red Menace had on Standard might have been subsiding, as its win rate in the last few regional championships was below 50% versus the rest of the field, the pros clearly knew otherwise. Let's take a look at why RAKDOS overperformed, which cards may have given it the boost it needed to crush the tournament, and some other top contenders from this past weekend's Pro Tour. RAKDOS Midrange. While it underwent many changes over the past few months, the current build of RAKDOS Midrange plays in a very aggressive way compared to its previous iterations. The main game plan of the deck is to curve the best 2-drop in Standard, Blood-Tithe Harvester, into a Fable of the Mirror Breaker or Graveyard Trespasser, followed by Shouldered the Apocalypse. This curve, backed by solid early removal in Cut Down and Go for the Throat, is capable of putting a solid amount of damage on an opponent, ideally getting them down to 10 or 12 life, at which point Invoke Despair can threaten to put them in the danger zone of single-digit life totals. The full complement of Reckoner Bankbuster, another card that put 25 copies of itself into the top 8, allows the gas to keep flowing, while also becoming a threat themselves to push in additional damage. The 2 Duress in the main deck are a nod to the ubiquitous Fable, as well as many decks becoming more top-heavy by running not only Invokes, but Cruelty of Gix and even Breach the Multiverse, all cards that saw heavy play in the tournament. However, the real innovation in this deck, and what really puts it over the top, comes in the form of the newly printed Chandra Hope's Beacon. With her static ability allowing a player to copy the most powerful spell in their deck at no extra cost, untapping with Chandra means a RAKDOS pilot can easily burn an opponent out, even from double-digit life totals, by either copying a large Light Up the Night or an Invoke Despair. Light Up the Night can even be flashed back by using Chandra's large loyalty, and as long as you don't drain her completely, she gets to copy the flashbacked burn spell to do another round of massive damage. Factor in the synergy Chandra has with cheap interactive spells like Duress, Abrade, and the other spot removal, and it's clear that this Planeswalker was an enormous gift to RAKDOS from March of the Machine. The sideboard choices are to shore up RAKDOS' matchups against other popular decks, like Lithomantic Barrage to efficiently dispatch Raffine Scheming Seer out of Esper Legends, Glistening Deluge to keep the green-white Toxic deck in check, and additional Duress for the Reanimator versions of the deck as well as the Mirror Match. With RAKDOS so clearly dominating the Pro Tour, will players find a way to push back against the deck's dominance before the next set releases in September? Only time will tell. Esper Legends. Esper Legends came into this weekend as the deck with the highest combined win rate of all the top decks, and was regarded by many as the best deck in Standard. Its stellar curve of turn 1 Skrelv Defector Might into turn 2 Thalia Guardian of Thraben, into turn 3 Raffine Scheming Seer, into turn 4 Shouldered the Apocalypse is nigh impossible to beat, especially when Esper wins the die roll. Add to that the new tools the deck picked up from March of the Machine like Rona, Herald of Invasion, and sideboard Ace, Surge of Salvation, and it seemed like Esper Legends was in a great position to take down the tournament. So, what went wrong? The main issue with the Esper deck is that it struggles to come back when it starts to fall behind on board, forcing it to try and keep being aggressive at the cost of card advantage. With no Reckoner Bankbuster or Invoke Despair to find more action, the deck must rely heavily on its starting hand and the top of the deck to cross the finish line, meaning mulligans can be particularly punishing for Esper compared to other decks. While the velocity that Raffine provides does help to mitigate mana flood and mana screw, it doesn't actually put the Esper player up on cards, meaning that an Esper player is often only able to play one spell a turn, and they must hope that it's good enough. While the Surge of Salvation in the sideboard is just what the Doctor ordered against the black-red decks, a timely duress from a RAKDOS opponent can undo that plan entirely. And while Invasion of Gobakan is a fine spell against any deck running a lot of removal, the Esper player can often find themselves in a racing situation, where attacking a battle on the board instead of your opponent's life total isn't ideal, and can be the difference between winning and losing. Will Esper Legends be able to adjust to the aggressive slant of the new RAKDOS midrange decks? With all the tools at its disposal, it seems like it's definitely possible. Orzhov Midrange. Another deck that saw plenty of success over the last regional championship season, mono-white midrange saw a sudden drop in popularity in the run-up to the Pro Tour, as Grixis midrange decks shelved their islands for the cleaner mana base of RAKDOS, in order to adapt to the 8 land destruction effects of mono-white. With no huge haymakers at the top of their curve to decisively close the game, the mono-white decks also suffered from a very slow, grindy game plan built around recurring bankbusters and wedding announcements with Sarah Paragon, and trying to finish the game with 2/2 and 3/3 creatures from their 2 white planeswalkers that led to record numbers of draws in matches of Paper Magic. A shift was needed, so that's what Autumn Burchett did, splashing black mana in her otherwise mono-white midrange deck in order to play the powerhouse late-game finisher Breach the Multiverse as a way to close the game quickly, in addition to several key sideboard cards. The full playset of Duress in the sideboard paid off in spades, as most of the important cards in Standard right now are non-creature spells such as Reckoner Bankbuster, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Invoke Despair, Cruelty of Gix, and Chandra Hope's Beacon. Additional spot removal like Cut Down and Go for the Throat also did heavy lifting against the aggressive decks post-sideboard. While the deck does seem solid, it's still trying to play a value-based, grindy game of Magic in a world where everyone else is either getting far more value for the price of their spells, such as with Fable, or doing something flashy and over the top, such as ramping into or reanimating Atraxa Grand Unifier, or copying Invoke Despair with Chandra. Will a version of mono-white midrange splashing black, or possibly another color to compete with the power of what other decks are doing, become the de facto best version of this deck? We'll have to wait and see. 5-color ramp. One copy of the 5-color ramp deck squeaked into the top 8 of the Pro Tour in the hands of David Olson, who said he built the deck specifically to combat RAKDOS. A wise choice, considering how things look this weekend. The deck uses Topiary Stomper on turn 3 to get 4 lands into play, so that on turn 4, Invasion of Zendikar can put lands 6 and 7 on the board, allowing the Stomper to attack, and potentially flip the invasion, putting yet another mana-producing body on the field. Now that's a lot of mana ramp. This allows the deck to hard-cast Atraxa Grand Unifier or Itali Primal Conqueror as early as turn 5, which can put the deck so far ahead that it's impossible for the opponent to catch up. The full playset of Archangel of Wrath may seem excessive, but it proved to be yet another excellent spell to ramp into early, as the life gain and board presence were instrumental against the RAKDOS decks that were trying to get damage in early, then essentially burn out their opponents in the late game with Invoke Despair and Chandra Hope's Beacon. In the sideboard, we see more board control in a third Sunfall, plus double Vanquish the Horde for the go-wide creature decks like Blue-White Soldiers and Green-White Toxic. The full 4 Lithomantic Barrage helps tremendously to shore up the match against Esper Legends, and Tyrannix Rex as another hard-to-interact with finisher to close the game quickly and decisively. With Unlicensed Hearse to combat the Rakdos Reanimator decks, this 5-color ramp deck definitely has the tools to survive in a Rakdos-plagued world, but finding the right main deck configuration of these cards can be tricky. Will a better version of the deck emerge before the next set drops? I imagine we'll soon find out.